Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are doing well today. My name is Lila Marton. You can call me Lin.
And I am Varom Sotipanchai. You can call me Mind. We are from the Architecture Department, School of Architecture and Design of King Mongkut University of Technology, Thonburi.
Will be the master of ceremony for today's speech. So, today's topic might sound a bit serious at first glance, but trust me, we are going to have some fun diving into today's talk.
Lynn, do you remember those sleepless nights spent making presentations to communicate effectively for our reveals?
Yes, of course I do.
Normally, when you start doing graphic design or presentation, how does your idea come from, or where do you look for the inspirations?
It might be funny, but usually I scroll through Pinterest to look for the inspirations until my phone gets full of storage.
Me too. And I think our fellow architecture students might facing the same problem, right? So I'm wondering if we have any better or faster way to start.
Of course we have. That's why today we invite our guest of honor, Pete Durante, our alumni from SOAD, to help us solve this problem and also share his experience. So let's welcome him.
Hello, P team. Thank you for giving us your time despite your busy schedule. So honored to have you here.
Oh,
Tim,
thank
can
you.
you introduce yourself a little bit?
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Tim, and my name is Durang, but you can call me Tim. I graduated from communication design program last year, and now I'm working at School of Architecture and Design. And um, a lot of my work tend to focus a lot more towards typography, graphic design, and layout design, and a little bit of illustration and so on and so forth. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so Tim, why do you think this graphic design is related to architecture, and why is this topic so important for architecture students like us?
So, I think all of the design fields are connected, right? Ultimately, but especially for architects to understand visual communication. I'm not going to use graphic design. I'll explain why I'm not going to use it in a bit. But the reason why I think visual communication is so important for architects, because you are dealing with very complex network of work or ideas and concepts that it's none of the I believe that none of the architecture projects are as simple as a sheet of paper that can be easily translated into a sheet of paper, right? So that is why I think you have to be smart, clear, and concise about the kind of message you want to give through, especially to your clients or your peers, your professors, Ajahn, so on and so forth. And that is why I think that you should be more mindful of how your work come off to other people who are viewing the your presentation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We would like to know more on this topic. So now let's give the stage to him.
All right. Cool. So the topic for today is visual communication for architects. But as I was preparing the presentation for today, and I do think that it can be what I'm about to share might potentially be useful for other people who has to communicate visually as well. Um, so here, this is what I see for designers. I think that the designers are problem solvers. Like, we basically have to design things to solve problems, whatever problem it might be. So when I started thinking about this topic, I must think that there is a problem, right? So what is a problem? In all disclaimer, I do not think that architects are bad designers. at least not graphically. Um, I just think that there is a need for architecture students to understand visual communication a little bit better. So this is what I'm going to show you. Please do not look at the works themselves. This is not a personal attack. I just took a picture of what I've seen before. I'm pretty sure most of you are very familiar with this kind of image, what's happening here. This by itself, I think it's okay. But as I was talking to more students, and some of you probably know, I have been running portfolio workshops over the past 6 months. And what I do notice for a lot of architecture students is they would just put the pin-up sheets into their portfolio directly. And something like this, right? This is just an image I found on the internet. Please don't. And even if you look at it on screen like this here, it doesn't. You can already tell that this doesn't really tell anything about your work. It's so hard to look at. You cannot really see what the text is about. Of course, it works if you are going to print it out on an A1 sheet, put it on a wall, and especially in an environment where people know more or less what you're doing or what you're talking about. So in an environment like that, that is completely okay. But especially to put it into a portfolio, to be perceived by people who might not understand what architecture is about, or people who do not know what kind of work you do, that becomes a problem. And another problem that I just talked about is also the medium. I guess if you're gonna put it, turn it into a digital portfolio, this is not working in terms of like layout or in terms of visibility or legibility, readability, all that, right? All of these concerns that we have to be aware as graphic designers, that become an issue. And I believe that architects already know the basics of how you should be facing this problem. And I hope this conversation that we're about to have is going to be a little bit of a reminder or a checklist that you can just kind of revisit and think about whenever you have to design a presentation or something, right? So here's why. Why should you listen to what I'm about to say? Why should you care about it, right? Because you will be talking with your clients in the future, in the very near future. Some of you already are probably doing that. You'll be sharing your work with your peers. And of course, most importantly, your personal branding, like what kind of branding you want to, what kind of image you want to give off of yourself to others, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, first of all, visual communication. I'm specifically using the word visual communication and not graphic design for a couple of reasons. First of all, I do identify myself as a graphic designer, but in this short conversation we're about to have, I don't think we can possibly have a full-on conversation about graphic design. And of course, it's not as simple as a short presentation for anyone to learn what graphic design is. And that's also because I think that graphic design is a much bigger field than visual communication. When I say visual communication, I'm not saying that visual communication is the smallest sect, but rather like visual communication is rather a tool. So that's why I'm specifically using the word visual communication. All right, so let's break that word down a bit. So visual communication, the first part is visuals, and then so what is communication, right? So communication is as simple as me talking right now, and there are a few people listening, and there are people in between. There are things that happens in between, right? And then visual communication simply is a step further from communication where you input visuals, right? Like for example, here I use a little emoji. I think the intention for that is to bring a bit more attention from the audience. So what is a good visual communication, right? So this is what I think a good visual communication should be. I think it should be concise, it should be clear, and it should be compelling as well. So in order to make a message that is concise, clear, and compelling, how do we do that? So this is the format that a lot of communication theorists have come up with. I mean, it's a very simple um, format. You don't even need a theorist to come up with this kind of model, right? So in most models of communication, you have a sender who's going to send a message, and you have a receiver. So in your case, as architects, you're going to be the sender who's going to be talking about your work. Uh, your work is going to be the message, and then there's going to be a receiver who might be your client, who might be your professor, who might be your peers. So the question here is, how do you craft a compelling, concise, and clear message, a clear message for anyone to perceive? So this is what I would like to say about this. First of all, you have to know yourself as a sender, and then you have to know your audience, know your receiver, right? Again, these are things that you might be like, yeah, of course, I already know that, but do you actually think about it, right? So my question here is, when you're preparing a presentation, do you actually think about your audience, or do you think about yourself? Do you put yourself into the presentation? So here are a few questions that you can be asking in order to um, talk about knowing yourself or knowing your audience. Of course, to know yourself, you have to know, what do you know? You have to know what you know. Uh, what what is it that you want to share, and how can you use your knowledge? Um, and then and the next part is knowing your audience. That's you have to. Of course, you can always straight up ask what they want to know. If you have a good relationship, if you have kept a clear communication, you can definitely know um, what your audience might potentially want to know, and you have to think about what they care about. Uh, what is their priority? And keep the word priority in your mind a little bit, because we are going to talk about that in a bit. Um, and then, why should they care? So earlier, so that last question, why should they care, uh, is one of the most important questions that I always ask as a designer. Why should anyone care about what I'm doing? Why should anyone care um, that I am talking about this, or I'm designing this, right? So that raises a question, so what? Um, so I believe that you will be crafting a good message, a good visual communication work, if you can clearly answer that question. So what? Why should anyone care? Um, and then, so after you've answered all of these questions, knowing yourself, knowing your audience, and if you combine that together, you can then create a clear, concise, and compelling message, I believe. So here, that the exercise itself here is fairly simple. I like to think of these as like little, even if you don't physically write it down, if you answer these questions um, in your head, they can definitely help in designing a better visual for your own presentations. And sometimes I personally like to write things down, write any of those down, so that I can clearly see um, what I have to do, what I'm about to do. And it's always nice to revisit them if I feel a little lost. I always go back to what I wrote down. And I'm like, okay, this is what I thought was important. Maybe it has changed, maybe it has not. So sometimes, a lot of times, actually writing things down is an important step, I believe. So visual communication design, uh, you might want to ask, well, that what I just talked about is fairly, it is basically just about communication. Um, it's not really about communication design or further visual communication design. Um, I can basically apply to all of that for any mode of communication, right? Yes. And the good news here is you already know how to create a good visual design piece. You have to remember the basics. So, what are the basics? Um, I'm pretty sure most of the audience right now are SOAD students, but at the same time, I believe some people are not. The basics that I am talking about, you already studied them, visited them in the first year, Design Fundamental. So here are the topics from Design Fundamental um, classes, like dot line plane, scale, proportion, composition, color, texture, etc., etc. I'll be very honest with you. When I was first here, I also did not fully understand why we did what we did. A lot of those classes felt a bit random. I'm like, oh, I'm not even sure if I did anything good. But like the topics themselves are already good materials. So I found myself, especially in later in third year, and of course definitely in fourth year, and now I'm working professionally as a graphic designer. Um, all of these topics are things that I regularly go back and visit. Like for example, dot line plane, scale and proportion and composition. Those are the things that kind of innately there already. Of course, you have to think about all of those. But sometimes I feel like this something is missing here. Something I don't exactly know what's missing, and that's a good time. That's every time I feel like that, I always revisit this list of things. Like for example, colors. I start to think, are the colors not working? What should I be doing if the colors are not working? And so on and so forth. And then texture. Texture is really important, in my opinion. When I say texture, it's not just adding texture to the images or the design itself, but sometimes creating a visual texture using text and image um, is itself is important. And then the movement. When I say movement, it's not usually it's not the actual movement, right? Like if you're printing something, of course, nothing is going to be moving. Um, but when I say movement, it could be the movement of the viewer's eyes. Like for example, where should where should the viewer look at your print first? Where in the composition they should be looking at it, and where should they move from there, and so on and so forth. And so all of those little things, uh, they can give you a direction where you can jump off of, and from there, um, you can build on, kind of like use these design fundamental knowledge as a building block and built on top of it. That's how I would say. And of course, once you have this basic understanding of knowing your audience and knowing yourself, and then crafting, knowing what the kind of message you want to send, um, and then you already have the basics. So we are now moving forward to finding reference. Earlier, Lynn said that she usually just go through Pinterest, and find something that can be inspiring. I mean, no, really, no offense to Lynn or any other person who does that. I would not rely so much on Pinterest. Admittedly, I do go through Pinterest sometimes. I'm just like looking through it, but there are a lot of problems with Pinterest. First of all, you don't really get to learn a lot about the projects themselves. You don't know who made those. You don't know who designed those. And worse, of course, you definitely cannot know what's going on in designer's mind. At this stage, I think we all understand that the process of designing is more important than the final work itself, right? So only when you understand that, you can kind of imitate what they're doing, and but at the same time also be there, have your own presence into your design. So that's why I would like to recommend places like Behance so much better. So this is Behance. Yes, you do need an Adobe account, but even if you don't use Adobe softwares because they're expensive, Behance is free. So you can just go there and uh, browse those any of those projects. Read the descriptions. If you find something interesting, you can always visit that designer's profile and find more works that then you can start to kind of see how their mind works. Like you can start to decode a little bit of that, more and more information, right? And the good thing about Behance also is the keywords are very design specific. So because in this case, we're talking about presentations, and uh, we're talking about presentations and how to present your work. So I would go with layout design, or you can even just type presentation design or etc. And then you can specifically get the kind of work that might potentially be a part of your work. So there's a book called Steal Like a Designer. Steal Like an Artist. So that book, it talks about a lot of things, but one of the things that talks about is how, as a designer or an artist, you should not be just looking at the final work, but rather, if you're going to steal, try to imitate what they do, what kind of process it goes on in your head, right? So this is another exercise that you can do. So this is from Behance. I just searched layout design and I got this. So this is a little zine. So the final product of this is a book, right? Um, we usually talk a lot about finding references, but I think that we don't talk enough about how to use the references, especially for layout design, something like layout design. So this is a full spread. This little exercise this is actually the exercise that we did in second year ComDes. We had to find a lot of references and find a composition. So the process itself is very simple. We just find little uh, blobs of images or text, and then um, we just see how the designer laid it out here, right? So I didn't do a perfect job here, but you can see the invisible line around the three middle blocks. So they obviously have set a hierarchy there, right? So if you and earlier I told you to remember the word priority. So priority, knowing your audience priority, can easily be translated into finding a visual hierarchy for you as a designer as well. So this little exercise can be looked at using those keywords that you learn from the fundamental as well, right? So from here, you can see the dot line planes. Oops. You can see the dot line planes, little dots, lines that go across in the middle like this. And then, of course, all of these huge squares, huge rectangles are the planes. And then the texture itself, you can see the texture that they used on the paper, the printing. This is definitely not the actual printing, right? But like they intentionally put the texture there. And then the visual hierarchy in terms of text, the first thing you see is probably the image, and then your eye tends to move towards the text that is right next to it, memories. And then the third hierarchy here is on top, touch the feelings with the story and so on. And then you go towards the left. So it's not always that your eyes move from left to right. Sometimes you can play around with composition like this as well. So this is basically what I wanted to share. You already know the basics, right? And know yourself, know your audience, and from there you can craft a clear, concise, and compelling message. And then last but definitely not the least, find your reference from very important, find your reference from credible sources. I recommend places like Behance, but there are also other websites that I can share. And then once you have your references, it's also the matter of how you use those references. And the last but not the least, I'm kind of saying this as a joke. Don't be afraid of using colors. Colors are really not your enemies. They are your friends, and they can be very useful for you to kind of set the visual cues and etc. Right. Yeah, so this is what I want to share. You already got it. You already have what it takes to be a good visual communicator. And this is just a very short, brief little reminder / checklist that I wanted to share with all of you. All right, so thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, team, for your talk. I didn't realize that there are so many design elements and also design fundamentals that can help us express our ideas. And also, I really appreciate your recommendations of websites, like to where to correctly look for the inspirations. And again, thank you so much. And it really expands my perspectives on this field. And now let's have a Q&A session. And first of all, we would like to ask you some of the questions we have prepared. And for the audience, I have already seen the comments in the comment box, but if you have any further questions, feel free to type down below.
Okay, so let me start off. I would like to know what are the keys to creating good, easy to understand visuals?
Oh, so the question is, what are the keys to creating good, easy to understand visuals? Keep it simple. Right, if you cannot understand it yourself, the audience probably will not understand it. It is very situational, so it's kind of hard for me to talk about it in a general sense. But I would say, again, set your priorities. Like, what do you want to talk about? Why are you making this visual? Sometimes visuals are not even needed. You can just put a word or a phrase, and it's better sometimes, right? So if you want to make visuals, why do you want to make it? is usually the question that I want. I like to answer. I like to ask myself. Yeah.
Um, Thank you, Tim, for your answer. And another question is, what are the challenges in creating the visuals from the graphic designer point of view?
What are the challenges in creating visuals from a graphic designer point of view? Um, again, it's quite broad because the challenges really depend on the project itself, or or the nature of the client. um, I would again revisit to knowing yourself and your audience, and you cannot let any of those, in my opinion, you cannot let any of those overpower each other, because I also have my identity as a designer, my taste and my desire to make things look a certain way as a designer and as a person. But sometimes um, the clients also like us. The clients also have their own tastes, and they come from a certain background, and that is why you just have to find a balance in finding something that is suitable for your client, but also yourself. You cannot really be, neither of the party can be overpowering, I think. It's usually the kind of challenge that I have to face, because sometimes, like we always joke about it, right? Like how the clients always tell us to make the logo bigger. Um, and it is actually a very relatable joke, because sometimes, a lot of times, we think that the logo is big enough, it's there, it already shows what the branding is. But the client, because they come from that logo company or a party, right? So they want to see they want to see it bigger, they want it bigger, more visible. um, yeah, so it's like finding those problems and then solving them would be the would be how you should be tackling it, I would say.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tim. And I saw some additional questions from the audience. We'll pick some of the questions and read them for you. The first question is there any recommend font style in your opinion that you think it suits the best in the presentation page?
Is there any recommended font styles? So I'm not sure how familiar you are with font pairing. Do you guys know about it? I mean, do you two know about it as MCs? Font pairing. I guess not, right?
Not really.
Right. So font pairing um, is where in a piece of design work, we usually use more than one font, right? When we say one font, it goes down to a very specific level of, like, for example, if you're using Helvetica, even if you use Helvetica Bold and Helvetica Regular, it already becomes a font pairing, because we consider it as more than one font, because they're still in the same family, yes, but two different fonts, right? So font pairing is where designers use more than one font to create hierarchy, or to create visual rhythm, or to make it more interesting. Um, as a designer, I like to avoid certain specific prejudice towards either a design element, including fonts. So I don't usually do that. Although you may have seen it, it's hard for designers to avoid things like Helvetica. But I just shared it in the chat. not in the chat, in the comments. There are a lot of online games about typography where you can explore different kinds of font pairings or different kinds of just to see how they work. So there are different ways of pairing fonts. I think it's best if you even just Google font pairing and learn more from there, rather than feeling like, oh, this font works. Like it's hard because those kind of things are always changing. Like if you ask me, like 7 years ago, Montserrat was probably the biggest, the font that was working probably the best. Right now, not so much. I wouldn't recommend anyone to use Montserrat now because it's not really, it's not up to date. And but there are situations where I would use Montserrat. So it's it's very subjective. It's hard to just say one font is better than the other. So just go there, try to explore. That's what I would recommend. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your recommendation. The another question is that about the websites. Most of the people are familiar with Pinterest, even for the people who and really from the visual communication background. So we would like to know other additional websites besides Behance that would be useful for both architects and designers with enough credibility.
There are a few websites that I usually frequent to as a designer. The first one is called itsnicethat.com. It's not really like it really is not like Behance. But the good thing, it's nice that is more like a media, a blog post kind of website where people, but they only talk about design related topics. But they also post about architecture and stuff. So I think it's a good resource to kind of frequent and see what's new and what's interesting. You can always explore different tags and different categories. That is what I do. That's another website that I like. This one might not be too relevant for you. There is a website called underconsideration.com. Oops, share. Okay. Under Consideration is also an interesting website where you can explore different kinds of, but this is a bit more graphic design based. So maybe not so much for you, but it's good to like just see those and kind of tease your brain a little bit because again, it is also a blog post kind of community post kind of place. So you can go into you can even read the comments, I think. So it's always nice to visit those. Specifically for Under Consideration, usually the place that I go to is underconsideration.com/brand new. It is basically a place where people post about rebranding projects, and then people comment about it, and that's where you see like how design is so subjective. But you also learn a lot about fonts, and sometimes I would just go there and read the comments, and someone talk about something that I've never heard of before, and it gives me a keyword to explore a bit. So that's how I would say is useful. Yeah.
Okay, and I saw there are many audience interest on color topic and choose to ask, like, what if color tend to distract the spatial qualities of an architectural project unless color are intended in the first place, such as with Paragon or MBRDV projects? So how would combine the thing together to keep the portfolio exciting?
Right. So it is uh, it's the argument that I have to face a lot whenever I talk to architects. Um, how would you combine these things together to keep the portfolio exciting? So yes, if you're not smart with how you're using the colors, they can be distracting. Um, so usually, when I design something, I try to I would come up with a color palette, right? And usually, the color palette I start with would have like maybe two main colors, or three at most, and then depending on what kind of message I'm giving, um, I would label each of those colors for each compartment. And again, it depends on the project itself a lot. It can be subjective as well. Um, but to actually answer your question, how can you keep it exciting? I would say define accent colors. Um, so that there are so once you have a main color palette, right, you have the main color palette, and then you also will have accent colors. Most of the time the main colors are just there, but especially for architectural presentations, I'm noticing, you only really need to be clever with the use of accent colors. So here are where, like, I will give you a few examples that I can think of right on top of my head why using color is can be your strength, right? So usually when we talk about wanting to make something more obvious, or we only think about making it bigger or making it bolder, but we can also use colors, right? We can put a little accent color behind or even on top, make it a circle highlighted, all the basics. You've already been doing it. um, but in the portfolio, if you I usually don't use like super saturated bright colors, um, as accent colors. Like yes, I agree, they can be distracting. I would This is relatively a hard question to answer in a general sense, because even for me, I it just depends on what kind of project I'm doing, right? Um, but in because you talked about portfolio and architectural works, I would say colors are don't make it don't. I said, colors are your friends, not your enemies. I say that because a lot of times the projects tend to look too a little too bland, and as a viewer, you don't really just keep it as accent colors and keep it as a guide for the viewers, I would say. Um, I think that's how you can find a balance. Accent colors. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, thank you. And another question is, how do architects ensure that their visual communication align with the overall design concept and vision? And what are some emerging trends and technologies in visual communication that are currently impacting the field of architects?
Okay, the first question: how do architects ensure that? So I'll think of how can you ensure that the visual communication aligns with overall design concept. Um, so you already have a design concept, and when you have that design concept, I would say you already have those. I would assume that you already have those elements, like either shapes or even angles somewhere, and you can actually keep those shapes or angles, um, and keep repeat those. You keep use it as a modular design or a repetitive design. If you do that, if you maintain those shapes, I would say the overall design concept and visual would usually be under the same alignment as the visual communication. Um, and the second question, what are the emerging trends and technologies in visual communications that are impacting the fields of architecture? I think we're all a little too obsessed with AI lately. Like, um, like even if you go to Photoshop, now they have generative AI fill where you can just type a few keywords and they will give you a visual, or they'll give you that. And it's the same in Illustrator. Oh, going back to color, now Illustrator have a color recolor option where you can type in the keyword and use AI to recolor your artwork or design a piece of design. So those are the things that I think you can use. I cannot really think of AI as I cannot really think of any other technologies other than AI right now that could potentially affect the way we work. Although I've been using AI, honestly, and I think it's a great tool to kind of explore and see how things go. It saves you time as well. In terms of emerging trends, this is my personal opinion. I think that a lot of things lately are like anti-design, anti-art, not anti-art, but anti-design principle kind of works. So for someone who relies a lot on these principles, I'm pretty sure architects do the same. Architects also rely a lot on these basic design principles and so on. So if you see a design like that, it might potentially disturb the deepest of your soul. Um, but I don't know. I think that's okay. That's the only emerging trend that you could. I don't think it could impact the field of architects, but maybe you as a person, you might find it a little disturbing. That's about it.
Okay, maybe the next question would be speaking for the portfolio, how do you think normally design the sequence and rhythm of excitement to still be exciting but not to be like too provoking?
Um, Speaking of portfolio, how do you normally design it? Again, very subjective, right? How do I normally design the sequence? Okay, so a lot of my works are graphic design. So I would say I like to tell stories, and I'm a pretty verbal person, as in uh, a lot of my storytelling, although I'm a designer, a lot of my storytelling comes from words. Um, so I usually try to have like a few images and a little bit of storytelling, a little bit of text, and then move on to the next part. Um, but the way I do it might not potentially work for you, because I can be very playful with words and the way I talk or the way I present in my portfolio. Um, and I think I'm allowed to do that as a designer. Maybe you're not allowed to do that as an architect. I'm not sure. Um, but again, like just think about, oh, okay, I just thought of something that might be useful, something short and concise. Think of contrast. Um, Contrast is so important everywhere, in everything, in almost everything that you do. Like, um, even if you're cooking, you need contrast, right? Even if like something needs to be the highlight of the dish or a taste, um, or the music. Usually, the chorus is the contrast, right? The same with your portfolio. Like, try to find peaks and lows. Like there should be something that the the viewer would want to look at longer than other elements. And then like if you think about it as like a wave, like those would be the peaks, and then you will go back and something less important, and then go back to the peak again. And I think that's how you can find an exciting and excitement. I'm not sure about not to be too provoking. I think uh, I'm not sure. I've never been in that kind of situation where people are like, "Oh, this is too provoking." So I cannot talk much about it.
Another question we received is, what do you think about the concept of less is more in communication design?
Less can be more. Right. So the presentation I did prepare today, very minimal. Um, and me as a designer, I do tend to go towards minimal kind of images, visuals. That's not always the case. I would say I don't really think about that word less is more. Um, I think it's just your personal preference as a designer or an architect. Um, that being said, so I think I would say it would go back to setting your intentions, like knowing yourself and knowing your audience. Like, and from there you will get a lot of keywords, right? I would assume. So usually I get keywords. If the keyword is something like clean or precise or whatnot, then I would go for it. But if the keyword is obviously something like noisy or loud, then usually less is not more anymore. Like because you clearly want to communicate that loudness, your that messiness, right? Um, so it really depends on on that. But you said in terms of communication design, then perhaps like you do want to make things concise, right? Like concise, the word concise itself kind of means less, compact, minimal. Um, so I'd rather not jump into design philosophies. If it works, it works.
Okay, thank you. And maybe the last question would be, are there any current trends in the visual communication within the field of architecture?
I'm sorry, what was the question again? Are there any current trends in the
Trends.
visual communication? Oh, this one. It's hard to say. I would say a lot of designs lately are very humanist. Yeah, I think I would say humanist designs are in. Earlier, I talked a little bit about anti-design works. Even if you look at the posters, different posters from Bangkok Design Week, you will see a lot of them are like very, not very communicative. Um, I, I, I think that's why I also wanted to make a clarification between visual communication and graphic design, because in terms of graphic design, these trends do exist. Um, but in terms of visual communication, it really is more about sending a message across. It really is more about communication, I think. And I don't think anyone should be concerned about trends. Like trends are cool to think about, and I used to really be like, I used to really look into those stuff every year. I'll be like, what is the design trend in 2016, 2017? And I would really kind of center myself around those previously. but now I don't know. I don't think trends matter as much. The only trend that for especially for architecture, the only trend I kind of want to point out or highlight is using 3D models. 3D uh, 3D designs are probably one of the most important trends right now, right? Like a little interactive designs, 3D designs. Um, so that's the only thing I would mention. Apart from that, I don't think others are that relevant. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tim, for all of your answers. And I think that's all for the Q&A session and our discussion on visual communication for architects. Again, thank you very much for this insightful talk. And it's really interesting how there are many design fundamentals and also why we should balance our inspiration with our own voice.
Thank you so much, team. I hope all of us learned something from your talk, and we really appreciate it. See you and have a nice day, team.
Bye bye, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It has been a very enlightening conversation, hasn't it, Mike?
That's right, Lynn. We would like to extend our sincere appreciation to each of you for your attentive engagement throughout the talk. It has been a pleasure sharing insights and ideas with us.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. And I'm sure this talk is very an eye-opening experience for you all as well. And let us carry forward the lessons we learned today with confidence and enthusiasm.
Okay. We hope you enjoyed today's topic. Here's to the exciting adventures that lie ahead. Please stay tuned for the next seminar, Carnival. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.